Hi friends, in this video we're going to talk about how to visualize CSV data in Grafana, something like this, using the Infinity Grafana plugin. So Infinity Grafana plugin is a data source using which you can visualize your CSV data in Grafana. By the way, the whole content of this video is present in this blog post and I will leave the link of this blog post in the description. So please be sure to check out this blog post. So using the Grafana Infinity plugin, we are able to take the data from a CSV file something like this and visualize it in Grafana something like this. So let's try to install the Grafana Infinity data source. I've got my Grafana up and running. So Grafana is an awesome visualization, analytics and alerting platform. If you don't know how to install Grafana or if you want to know more about Grafana, I've already created a playlist on Grafana. I will leave the link of this playlist in the description, so check it out. So I'm in my Grafana and in Grafana go to connections, add new connection and search for a connection. So our data source is the Infinity data source, right? So search for Infinity. So you can see the Infinity data source. And since I've already installed, I'm getting the uninstall button. But in your case, you will see an install button. Click on the install button and Infinity data source will be installed. So this is the most easy way to install the Infinity data source plugin. Let's see how to install the Infinity data source from the command line. So I'm going to go to the C program files, Grafana labs, and here go to Grafana and here go to the bin folder and open a command line here in administrative mode. So I'm going to open the command prompt here, run as administrator and copy this path and write cd this path. Now I'm in the Grafana's bin folder and in the Grafana's bin folder you can execute the command grafana cli.exe plugins install and this is the ID of the Infinity data source, and if you run this command the plugin will be installed. So that was how to install the Infinity data source from the command line, and if your Grafana doesn't have internet access you can even install the plugin from offline. For that you need to install the plugin's zip file from GitHub. So I'm going to the GitHub's Grafana Infinity data source repository and here in the releases there are 80 releases. Click on the releases option and here we will see the latest release, and if I show all the 23 assets here, search for the Windows zip file. So this is the Infinity data source Windows installation zip file. Just download the zip file and open the zip file after it's downloaded, and this is the plugin folder. So just copy this plugin folder and place it in the Grafana's plugins folder. So in the C program files Grafana labs folder, go to Grafana data plugins and here you should copy paste the Infinity data source plugin folder. And one more thing you need to ensure is the Grafana version compatibility. So just cross check the plugin.json file. So I'm going to right click and open it with notepad, and the Grafana dependency is greater than 9.5. my Grafana is already version 10, so there should not be an issue. So in your case also just check the plugin.json for Grafana dependency just to make sure the version of the plugin is compatible. So that was how to install the Infinity data source offline from the zip file. Alright, we have installed the plugin. Let's try to create a CSV data source. So in the Grafana home, open the sidebar, connections, data sources and click on the add new data source. Now search for Infinity data source. Since we have installed the plugin, we will see this option. Click on the Infinity data source and name it whatever you want, something like CSV data source, and then save the data source. Now that we have created a CSV data source, we can use it in our dashboards. So let's go to Grafana home and in the sidebar dashboards, I can create a new dashboard and let's try to add a visualization, and here I'm going to select the CSV data source which I've just created, and now let's try to configure the data source to read data from a CSV. Select the type as a CSV and the parser can be made backend. If you make the backend parser you can get alerting features, row grouping, filtering, summarizing features. So I'm giving the parser as backend, and now the source is the URL. That means the CSV should be passed from a URL. The plugin has already given a URL. Instead of users.json, let's try to keep it users.csv, and let's try to open this URL in a new tab. So this is some sample CSV data. Let's try to open the raw file, and this is the CSV data. Let's try to copy this CSV data URL and in the edit panel paste this URL. So in this way you can host your CSV and give the URL of the CSV to the plugin, and the plugin will read data from the CSV through URL. And here you have some advanced options. So if you want to add some HTTP headers like authorization headers, or some URL query parameters, you can do that here. But for now, my CSV is directly hosted at a URL. Alright, let's try to reload this and switch to a table view. So I'm going to click on the table view, or else you can click the switch to table button, and now the data from the CSV should be visible here. That's how you can make the data available to the plugin using a CSV URL. But if you want to upload a file, or if you want to directly paste the CSV content, it can be done by changing the source to the inline. So inline source means either you can paste the CSV content or you can upload the CSV file. Let's try to upload the CSV file. So I'm going to upload a small CSV file here, and the data is directly being pasted in this data input field. Instead of uploading a CSV file, you can even paste the CSV content in this data input field. I have this field.csv file. Let's try to open it with Notepad. Let's try to Control A, Control C. I've copied all the content of the CSV. And now let's try to paste this here. You can see the whole CSV data is visible here. So in this way, you can either upload a CSV file or you can copy paste the content of the CSV, and the CSV would be loaded for visualization. By default, the CSV delimiter is a comma, but if your CSV delimiter is something like a tab space, you can declare that here. So expand the parsing options, and here you can specify the delimiter. By default, the delimiter is comma. So if your CSV uses comma to separate the cells, you don't need to do anything. But if your CSV uses tabs, then you need to explicitly mention the tab in the delimiter. So this is how you can use a CSV URL or a CSV content or a CSV file upload and use the CSV data for visualization. Alright, we have installed the CSV Infinity plugin. We have loaded the CSV data. Now let's try to skip the boring part and let's try to visualize the CSV data. Let's try to take this CSV data only. Here you have a times field, and here you have some field 1, field 2, which are some metrics. So let's try to create a time series visualization here. But before you do the visualization, you need to declare the columns for the CSV data. So in the query, just scroll down and you can see the section parsing options and result fields. Let's try to expand this section, and now you need to declare the columns. So I want to plot this created at field 1 and field 2. So let's try to click on add columns, and here I can write the column name as created at, and you need to declare this as a time. So the format would be time. You can even alias this. I can just write it as time, or you can just write it as created, and then add another column. The column would be field 1, and it's actually a number, and add another column. The column is field 2, and it's also a number. So I am seeing these headers and declaring them along with the data types so that I can use them for visualization. After I enter the columns which I want to visualize, reload this and you can see those columns only. Now let's try to change the view from table view to time series. Click on zoom to data, and now you can see the time series visualization from the CSV data. Since there is a timestamp column, automatically the CSV data source is using the timestamp column data for x-axis, and there are two metrics, right? So two metrics are shown as two time series data here. So if you add one more metric column, then a third series would be shown in this time series. In fact, let's try to do that now. Let's try to create a calculated field. So using the CSV data source, you can even create calculated columns. So there are only two columns, field 1 and field 2. Let's try to create another column which is field 1 plus field 2. So I can do that by expanding these computed columns. By the way, computed columns are only possible if you declare the parser as backend. So make sure you make the parser as backend. Then you will get this option of computed columns section, and here add a computing column. The expression would be field 1 plus field 2, and if I just reload this, you can see field 1 plus field 2 data being shown in the visualization, and you can even obviously alias it. I can write this as field 3, and the name is being updated here. So this way I can use calculated fields from the CSV. Alright, now that we have done the time series, let's try to do some non-time series visualization, something like a bar chart. So let's try to add another visualization, add visualization, and here let's select the CSV data source, and let's make the type as CSV, and parser would be backend parser, and the source is URL. I've kept some sample CSV file in this folder and I will host this folder locally. For that, I'm going to open a command prompt in that folder and I will use a simple Python command to host the folder locally. So I'm going to write python -m http.server, and if you click enter, the folder would be hosted and you can use the URLs. So the folder is running at localhost port 8000. So if I want to see this data, I can write localhost port 8000 / feed.csv. For this example, let's try to use this website traffic.csv. So in my query editor, I will replace this with http localhost port 8000. Let's try to copy this file name and write this .csv. Click on enter and see the table view. Now you can see the whole CSV data is being shown because we have hosted the CSV file and we are using the URL of that CSV file. So this CSV file contains some sample data about a website traffic. So for each date, you are getting some metrics for each browser type also. Something like for this date, Chrome had this much visitors, Firefox had this much visitors, etc. etc. But now to create a bar chart, I just wanted to know for all days how many visitors Chrome had got, for all the dates how many visitors Firefox has got. So here you can see where we are going. We want to summarize the data, we want to group the data based upon row values, and that's possible with this data source. In the query, let's try to see this section computed columns, filter and group by. And yes, you guessed it, using the group by we can group the rows based upon the row values. So expand this, and in the group by section there is something called summarize. You have options like min, max, mean, sum, count. So I just want to add all the number of visitors for a particular browser type. So I'm going to do the sum of visitors because the name of the column is hashtag of visitors. So yeah, first we need to declare the columns. So let's try to expand this, click on add columns, and here let's try to write the column name, which is hashtag of visitors, and let's try to make the title as visitors. And we need one more column, which is the browser, and number of visitors is actually number. We require only these two columns, so I've declared these two columns. Now I have created a column with alias visitors, and I can use that in my computed fields or summarizing fields. So I want to add the number of visitors for a particular browser type. So the summarization would be sum of visitors, and the summarize by would be by the browser column. Let's try to remove this summarize by, and now if you see, you can see only the summary, which is the complete sum of visitors. But if I want to break the sum by the browser column, I can write summarize by browser. So the sum is made for each browser type. So browser column is used for grouping the rows and then summed by the column visitors. And obviously the alias can be not summary, you can write visitors, or you can write it as browser visitors, and that's it. Now your CSV data is being summarized by grouping based upon the browser column, and you're adding the visitors column values for each group and summarizing the data. Now you got some valuable information. Let's try to show it as a bar chart instead of a table. So I'm going to select this time series, and I can select something like a bar gauge and remove this table view. Let's try to make the orientation as horizontal, and in the value options you can say all values. Then you can see the bar chart. You can even give some thresholds. So in the thresholds, instead of 80, you can write something like 1000. That means if the number is greater than 1000, then only you can see the red color. So this way I have created bar chart from the CSV data, and I have even summarized the rows by grouping the rows and summing the values of a column inside a single group. So we have created a time series, we have created a bar chart, and we have even created columns from other columns by computed columns, and we have also created a bar chart by grouping the data. Obviously you can create a bar chart without grouping the data also, but in our scenario we had to group the data to get the bar chart values. Now let's try to create one more interesting visualization. Let's try to create a geomap. So let's try to click on add visualization, and let's try to make the data source as CSV data source. The type of the data would be CSV, the parser would be a backend parser, and the source would be the URL. And for this example, I'm going to take this abnyc.csv, which is some Airbnb data of New York City. So I'm going to write the data URL as http localhost:8000 / airbnbnyc.csv. And let's try to reload this, go to the table view, we got all the CSV data being shown here. Since we are showing the geographic data, you need to either have the longitude, latitude for each row, or else you need to have some country codes or Grafana understandable country names so that Grafana can understand the geographic location of each row. In our example, we have the latitude and longitude of each row. So let's try to plot something like minimum nights column for each longitude, latitude. So now let's try to declare the columns. So inside the parsing options, add columns, and the first column name, let's try to give it latitude. So latitude is the column name, so I'm going to write latitude, and obviously it's a number, so let's try to declare it as a number. And let's try to declare the longitude, and it's a numeric column, so select it as a number. And since we want to show the minimum nights on the geographic map, let's try to add the column and write minimum nights, and it's also a number. Let's try to reload this. We've got our data which we want to show in the geographic map. Now let's try to switch the visualization to something like geomap. So this is a geomap visualization. We got the geomap, and if you remove this table view, you can see a geographic map. By default, Grafana understood our data and plotted it already. Since it's a New York data, all the data points are in the New York City. Now let's try to see some important configuration. The first important configuration, which I think is the initial zoom and center of the map. So let's try to make this as the initial zooming and the map center. So in the right pane, use the current map settings. So the initial view coordinates and the zooming is automatically set. You don't need to manually do that. Just pan the map to your required location and zooming, and click on the current map settings. Now let's try to declare the latitude, longitude columns and the data columns based upon which the marker size would be decided. So let's go to the map layers. Automatically we got a layer called layer 1, and inside the layer 1 you can see the location mode. Let's try to change the location mode to coordinations. Specify the latitude field. The latitude field is latitude, the longitude field is longitude, and the styles, you got the size. Size is fixed value 5, but we don't want the size to be fixed value. The size should be based upon the minimum nights column. So instead of fixed value, change it to the column minimum nights. And now you can see there are some big bubbles, there are some small bubbles, because the bubble size is based upon the minimum nights column. You can even change the minimum and maximum bubble size based upon which the value will be mapped. So if I change this maximum to something like 20, bigger value bubbles will be more big. So if you don't want to show the legend, something like this layer 1, just disable this show legend. When I display over a bubble, I can see only the latitude, longitude and minimum nights. I just want to see some more data like the name of the host. So let's try to add one more column here. So I'm going to add column, and I'm going to say the name, and the type is string. So if you see the table view, the name is also coming for each row. So if I hover over the bubble, I can see the name also. You can even change the base map layer. Instead of default base map, you can use the OpenStreetMap. Now let's go to a dashboard. Just like that, very easily we are using a geographic map which is fetching data from a CSV. But one thing I've observed using the geographic map, it's not that much fast. If the data is very huge, it stucks the Grafana window. Alright, we have almost covered all the options. Let's try to cover one more last option, which is the filtering rows. You can specify conditions to filter the rows from the source data set. Suppose if I want to show only rows where the minimum nights is something like greater than 100, I can do that here. I can just write minimum nights, which is the column name, greater than something like 1000. Now you can see there was no data which is greater than 1000. Let's try to make it something like greater than 100. Now you can see only the data where the minimum nights is 100. So this way you can use simple filters to filter out the rows which you don't require. So that's it. I think we have covered most of the basic points on how to use Grafana CSV data source, which is the Infinity Data Source plugin. And using the Infinity Data Source plugin, you can easily visualize data in Grafana. We have covered how to install the Grafana Infinity Data Source, how to load the CSV from a URL or file or inline text, and how to visualize the CSV time series, how to create some calculated columns, how to visualize geographic data from CSV, how to visualize non-time series data, and how to summarize or group the data based upon the row values and visualize them something like bar charts. And you can even group the rows, filter the rows, or you can create derived columns or the calculated columns. You can see I've created a blog post on how to use Infinity Data Source to visualize CSV in Grafana. So please be sure to check out the link of this blog post in the description of this video. I've given the images and required notes so that you can use the Infinity data source easily in your setup. I've also given references to some sample data so that you can play around, and I've also given you the link to the official CSV data source documentation. You can visit this documentation so that you can do further reading and go deep in how to use the CSV data source in Grafana. Please ask questions or post your valuable feedback in the comment section. Hope you like this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Peace.